This is an interview, interrogation.
An interrogation. Yeah. Okay, what's the interrogation about?
I don't know. You've brought me here and you've asked me. You want to ask me a few questions, so
I thought you can ask me some questions. No, well, actually, I think the most important question.
Yeah.
Well, it's a question that most people are asking. So, as you can see from the videos and the comments, throughout the internet, is, you can't prove God. That's what atheists say.
Yeah.
You haven't got any proof for God. How do you prove God? Or you're making claims that God exists, but you can't prove it.
Right.
So that's their claim, that we can't prove God. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's two different types of people. You've got the agnostic type people who are saying that we have insufficient evidence to prove God, and therefore they believe in something else, or they don't believe in God, or they don't believe this. They're not sure. And then you have the atheists who just completely refute God and any idea like that, and they are convinced that there's definitely no God.
Okay, let me just stop you there for a second. Right. So I think we're mixing a lot of things there. So, modern atheists, they say something different.
Okay.
Right? They don't say there is no God. Right? Even though some of them do believe that, even though some of them do say that, the really smart intellectual ones will say, they won't say no, there isn't any God. They'll just say, I have not seen any good evidence for God, therefore I've got no reason to believe there's a God.
Okay.
Or, if you say there's a God, you've not made a good argument for God, so why should I believe in it? That's what they say. Right? They're not saying there isn't a God, because they know if they say that, it's quite a sneaky maneuver on their part, really, is that they know if they say that, then they've got to prove the point that there is no God, and they know they can't do that. So what they say, for me, it's a kind of, I think it's like a cowardly position they say, a position they take, where they will just claim that the evidence for God is not there, and therefore it's up to us to prove it, and if we don't prove it, then they are not going to believe in God.
Yeah.
Now, does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I can understand that. Whether it makes sense is something different. So they refuse to believe in God because they don't have sufficient evidence for God.
That's what they say.
But they refuse to believe there is a God. They agree to believe there is no God. And
they don't say that. They don't say there is no God.
Do they agree, or do they believe that there is no greater cause, there is no greater being behind the universe?
Yes, most of them will say there isn't. They'll say there's no evidence that there is some greater being or something behind the universe. What they will say is that this universe is just matter and energy. And that's it.
Now, believing in something like that sounds illogical. Well, is illogical.
What do you mean?
The fact that you can believe everything came from nothing doesn't make logical sense. So how can you believe in something illogical? So for atheists to say believers are illogical, it makes no sense, because we base our beliefs off understanding and logic and reasoning and actual facts. Whereas atheists say we don't believe it because we can't see it and we don't have a definite. But then their whole belief system is illogical, because you can't have everything from nothing, and that doesn't make logical sense. And a lot of atheists, I can't quote them, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of atheists that do believe and do agree that there's a huge gap in this knowledge that they have.
Yeah.
And
so, like Brian Cox says that in the video, those clips that I put up, he will say that we don't know, right? We don't know enough to say anything, and he's saying that they don't have the right to get into this arena of discussion, because it's not an arena for science. Science is there to measure things.
Yeah.
It's called empiricism, where you make measurements, and then you arrive at conclusions based on that. Now, if there's something like a God exists outside of the universe.
Yeah.
So how can you measure God? or look for evidence for God
Yeah.
from an empirical, scientific way. So it doesn't make sense to say, show me scientific evidence for God. Now, that's one of the most silly things atheists ask for. Give me scientific evidence for God.
Yeah.
It just shows you how that's one of the silliest things they say.
So they just to get that point clear, so they do believe that it's illogical to ask for reasoning of God based on the laws within this universe. Is that what Brian Cox says?
Brian Cox doesn't say it as
bold as that.
Yeah, as bold as that. What he says is that we don't know,
right?
And it's something that we shouldn't really comment on. It's not an area that we should enter into. It's not the arena that they work in. It's not the arena for science to be discussing things like that.
Right. Okay.
It's a different discussion. Now, when you said, atheists believe and don't believe, now they would disagree with that. They don't say we don't believe in God. They will just say that we don't have any evidence to believe in a God.
Right. Okay.
But then they will use a comparison. They'll say, well, we don't have evidence to believe in God, just the same way we don't have evidence to believe in Santa Claus or leprechauns or flying spaghetti monsters, or something called Russell's teapot.
Yeah.
Russell was a philosopher who said there might be a teapot, orbiting the solar system. Mm-hmm. How can you prove it? How can you disprove it?
Yeah.
Maybe it's on the other side of a planet and you just can't see it.
Right.
So just because you can't see something, you can't disprove it. Now, that is a false equivalence fallacy. They're comparing the belief in Santa Claus with a belief in God. Yeah. Which is completely nonsensical, because there's plenty of evidence for God. There are plenty of good arguments for God, but there's absolutely zero arguments for Santa Claus. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you watch a lot of the clips that I've put up from atheists, a lot of them will discuss God, and they will say we can't say it doesn't exist, and we don't know if it exists, and a lot of atheists will admit there's some sort of evidence, like, for example, the famous guy called Christopher Hitchens. In one of the clips, he was saying the strongest argument from the other side is the fine-tuning argument. So he found an argument that he found was, at least had some value in his opinion.
Yeah. Right?
So you find me an atheist, an intelligent atheist, or a scientist who will say, the strongest bit of evidence for Santa Claus or a unicorn is this, or the strongest argument for leprechauns is this. You'll never find that, will you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a stupid analogy.
So comparing the proof of God with, comparing God to Santa is a sign of great stupidity. Any atheist who makes that claim or that analogy of God and Santa Claus is just being stupid or dishonest.
Yeah, because those things those things are bounded by Earth anyway, and they're bounded by laws of physics and laws that we understand. God is something we don't understand. So taking religion out of this, God is something we can't describe, can't explain, and we agree that as Muslims we can't describe and explain God.
Yeah, but that's not just saying we can't explain and can't describe. That's not good enough.
Right,
from a logical point of view. Yeah. You've got to. So we should really make the argument. What is the proof of God argument?
Right. No, I'm saying you can't ask to describe something that we can't see or know, but you can't say it doesn't exist. Now, describing something and proving existence are completely two different things. You can know there's a greater power out there from the evidence you have. You can't explain.
It's proven logic.
You can't explain what created it. For example, if you use a painting and a painter, you can't explain how the painter looks looking at the painting.
Yeah. Or the better way of thinking about it.
No, you can say, if you have a painting, you can say that it was created, but you can't, if you're just in that painting dimension,
exactly,
you can't explain how that painter looks. what laws of, because in a painting this is 2D, there's no laws of physics, there's no flow of the brush, you can't explain how that works in that 2D painting. The flow of the brush doesn't exist, it's uncomprehendable for them. So now to explain how God works and how it all happens it's stupid.
That's a good analogy.
But to refute his existence is very logical, and it's
okay. So let's just go through that analogy that you just made, because that's what I use a lot, right?
Yeah.
Which is, imagine the Mona Lisa painting. She's sitting there on a canvas, and then so imagine there's another painting, and the two of them are sitting there together having a chat in their painting world, and one says, so you think you've got a creator, someone that created you. And she'll say, yes, I do believe there's a creator who's like, in a greater dimension than ours, who's got features that are well beyond ours. And the other painter will say, well, that's silly. Then who painted your painter then? Right. If you were painted by Leonardo da Vinci, the supposed mythical creature called Leonardo da Vinci, then who painted him?
Right.
And what paints is he made out of? And which canvas is he on?
Yeah.
So it's a wrong analogy. That's a good analogy for us to say, the same way a painting can't imagine the 4 dimensions that we exist in, the same way we cannot imagine God who exists in dimensions well beyond ours.
Yeah.
But anyway, should we not sort of discuss the most important thing, which is how do you prove God?
Yeah, I was just going to go into that actually. Yeah. So I was going to ask you now, as say, let's pretend I was an atheist.
Okay.
And I was to ask you, how do you prove God? What are your evidences? You're saying that it's logical that there is a God. Where does this logic come from? How is it logical that there is a God? Explain that to me.
So the first thing is something called the uncaused first cause. So think of everything comes from something else. So energy comes from previous energy.
Right.
So energy comes from energy. And you can trace energy all the way back in time until you get to the Big Bang. All the energy in the universe at the moment came from energy which was there a second ago, which came from energy which was there a second ago. And if you keep going back in time, all the energy came from the singularity.
Yeah.
Right? So energy cannot be created and cannot be destroyed. Correct? So therefore, energy cannot create itself. For energy to create itself, it has to be there first of all to create itself.
Yeah.
So some people would say, well, energy was not created; it's just always been there. The universe has always been there. That's a common claim by atheists. Now, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that claim?
Sorry?
What's wrong with that claim that energy has always been there? If I say that everything is energy, and energy in the universe at the moment was there yesterday, and the day before, and the day before, or a second before, and all the way back in time, all the way to the Big Bang.
Yeah, then you're saying energy is infinite. There's no start point to it. There's no end point to it.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that claim? Because that's what some atheists claim.
Yeah. So energy is a physical thing. It has to be created by something. There has to be an initial cause. You can't just have energy come out of anything for it to amount to something.
Okay, so why can't it just be infinite like some atheists claim?
Because it's bounded by value. It's bounded by amount. It's bounded by physics.
Well, okay, let's think. I'll give you my sort of explanation on this then.
Yeah.
Right, so for energy to have always existed for infinity, that means that the past is infinite. Right?
Yeah.
Right, if the past is infinite, that means that there's some point in the past which is an infinity away from now, right?
Yeah.
And just think of the energy that's in your body right now. That energy has come from previous energy, which come from previous energy, and it wasn't created, and it doesn't get destroyed. So it's just changing from one form to another, right?
Yeah.
Now, if that energy existed at all times, it must have existed at that point an infinity of time ago.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So the energy of you, if there's an infinite past, did exist an infinity of time ago.
Right.
Do you get it?
Yeah.
Now, if the energy that's in you existed an infinity of time in the past,
Yeah.
and then time sort of moves on, how would it get to now? Because if it's an infinity of time in the past,
Yeah.
that means there's an infinite amount of time between then and now.
Yeah.
How could it go through that infinity of time?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's impossible.
It can't be bound. Energy is bounded by the laws of physics. Nothing in the laws of physics can be infinite. Therefore,
it's
energy
measurable.
can't. Yeah. So anything that's energy is bounded by time. It's.
But I think people are going to argue about the way you've said that. There'll be something technical about the way you said that, which someone's going to complain about.
Right. Okay.
But you do understand the idea that. Do you understand the point that the past can't be infinite?
Yeah.
Because if the energy that was in the universe was in an infinite time in the past, it will have never got to now. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So therefore, that proves that the past has to be finite. That proves that things had to have started at some point that matter and energy had to have started at some point in the past.
Got you.
And then you say to yourself, well, how did something come from nothing? How did the energy come from? It can't have created itself, because if it creates itself, that means it was there already, which means they didn't create itself because it was already there.
Yeah.
If it was created by more matter, then you'll say, well, what created that matter? Then what created that matter? Then you get what's called the infinite regress of causes, or infinite regress of, I call it infinite regress of matter and energy.
Yeah.
Right. So the only logical terminator of this problem is an uncaused first cause. It means something that doesn't have a cause that caused the whole thing. And this uncaused first cause cannot be material or existing in time, or in our concept of time, because if it did, then it would be subject to that infinite regress again.
Yeah, but just to simplify, to make it simple for whoever understands how energy it can't be infinite. The first cause of this universe cannot be bounded by the laws of physics. It can't be something from within this universe. Just to simplify it.
That's it.
And to debate that point, silly.
Okay, and then the next point, an atheist would make is then, okay, you've got an uncaused first cause. That's not God. It's just an uncaused first cause.
So just to pause you there, are there a lot of atheists that do believe in an uncaused first cause, or is that that's not a...
Well, look, atheists will try to avoid this topic,
Right,
or they'll try and find excuses for it. They'll say the past can be infinite. They'll say time is not the way we think it is. They'll give you some theories of science to try and weasel out of this problem.
Yeah.
They'll find ways to try and wriggle out of the problem.
Okay.
They won't give you any facts for it. They'll just give you possible speculative scenarios.
What do guys like Brian Cox say about things like this?
He will just say we don't know. No, he actually has said that the past, we don't know that the past is not infinite. We don't know that the past started. And I don't know what he's basing that on. No one's challenged him on that, and he's not been in an arena where it's going to be debated. So he's just using some. There will be some scientific theory somewhere that will say yes, the time can be past infinite.
Right. Okay.
And so he's probably just quoting that. There's probably models of physics and models of maths that will say that.
do justify that.
Yeah, but if you think about it logically, what I would like someone answering is, if the past is infinite, how do we get to now? Full stop.
Okay.
Right, and that applies for the multiverse or whatever option they want to put forward.
Yeah.
That's the question that's still there.
Yeah. It's funny that people can believe in things like this which don't make logical sense and don't need evidence for these type of things, but then require huge amounts of proof for things which make logical sense.
Yeah,
and
that shows you the dishonesty of the atheist. It's like, they will say, the multiverse is possible, even though it's the most ludicrous idea, and a lot of scientists will say it is. Right? It's an illogical idea, or it's got so many problems. They'll happily believe that.
Yeah.
They won't make this massive argument about, extreme claims require extreme proofs or something like that. They will just happily swallow that.
Because if you really think about it, they see God as an extreme claim, and God
extraordinary claims require extraordinary proofs.
Yeah, and God has many, many proofs.
So let's first clear up that point that you said. Do any atheists believe in the uncaused first cause? Now, when you get into a discussion like this, There will be a small percentage of atheists who will say, okay, I'll grant you that, that, there logically could be an uncaused first cause.
Right.
But they will quickly say, well, it doesn't prove anything. It's just an uncaused first cause. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be a being. It could be a force. It could be anything. So the question is, how do you convert that into a proof for God? You've got the first step. You've got a creator in a sense for the universe. But this creator could be just he doesn't have to be a personality as such. So do you know what the arguments are for going from that to a God?
Going from?
An uncaused first cause to build it up into an argument for God. Okay, so I'll just run.
Yeah.
So
is it to do with purpose?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Right, okay. That's one thing that just popped up to my head. Purpose.
Okay, so basically, if you're sitting there and you're an uncaused first cause, and then you bring the universe into existence at some point, that suggests that you've got some kind of volition, some kind of will, where you've decided to bring the universe into existence at some point, because it's not been in existence all the time. It's at some point the existence comes in for the universe.
Yeah.
So that suggests volition or will, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is, this thing has to be extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Right? Just think of all the amount of matter in the universe. It's immense. It's beyond anything we can imagine. So it has to be something extremely powerful. Correct?
Yeah.
Secondly, or thirdly, is if you look at the universe, there's a huge amount of intelligence built into it. For example, fine-tuning, the elegance of the maths, which is another argument for God. So let's look at, so we've got something which is powerful, something which has got intelligence, something which has got a will that's created the universe. Obviously it doesn't prove any particular God, but it's suggesting something that's a stupendous power. Does that make sense?
Got you.
Right. So the other thing is, when you talk about intelligence, and it's almost like there's a signature. There's a signature in the universe.
Yeah.
You want to stick it out? Right. Cat got bored of the conversation.
No.
So, where was I? Right, what are we talking about? Okay, so in intelligence, why is it an intelligence? Let's think about that. First of all, to create a universe with such amazing features suggests an intelligence, right? But there's other things. There's something called fine-tuning, right? Now, the laws of physics are supposedly fine-tuned. What does that mean? The expansion rate of the early universe. That the early universe expanded at a certain rate. Right? If it expanded just a tiny bit faster than that, it would expand so fast that no complexity would have formed. You wouldn't have atoms. You wouldn't have anything, right? And if it was just a tiny bit slower, everything would have expanded for a while, then just collapsed again due to gravity, and you get nothing. You get no complexity again. And it's such a knife edge that it's tuned to the 15th decimal place. Right.
Okay.
So if you just change something at the 15th decimal place, right?
Wow.
What's that?
The 15th decimal place.
Yeah. So
0.0000.
Yeah. 1,000 billion billion or something like that. 1 in 1,000 billion 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 or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. If you just change something in one part in 1,000 billion billion or whatever, it's either going to collapse or it's going to shoot out too far and form no complexity. That's how fine-tuned it is.
Yeah.
And there's other things that are even more fine-tuned than that. That's like 1 in 10 to the power of 15 of accuracy. There are things that are 1 in the power of 120. 10 to the power of 120. That's more than all the particles in the whole of the universe. That's how fine-tuned something is. That's like having the whole universe and just changing one atom in it.
And the whole thing's
the whole thing,
collapses on itself.
Collapses, yeah. So I think that's the cosmological constant called lambda.
Right.
Which is, I think, the energy in vacuum space. Something like that. Anyway, there's,
So let's just talk about fine-tuning itself.
There's lots and lots of other examples of fine-tuning. right? So if you've got a universe with all these very, very fine-tuned constants, that suggests that there's some, and also, there's such an elegance and intelligence in the way things are done that, that scientists are in awe of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's fine-tuning. The other thing is the mathematics that describes the universe. Think of the equation E=mc².
Yeah.
Such a lovely equation. It's so neat. It's almost everyone knows it.
Yeah.
So there's a guy called Paul Dirac, who's a mathematician, who said that that the maths that describes reality is very, very elegant.
Yeah.
And if any equation that he found didn't have that elegance and simplicity, he would suspect that it wasn't perfectly correct, and there was something that's going to supersede it.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, so so the beauty of the maths, the elegance of the math is that describes reality, fine-tuning, suggesting that there's a great, great, great intelligence. And if you look at things like in the natural world, the instincts of cats, you've got a pufferfish under the sea that can produce works of art on the sea floor. Are you telling me that evolution has done this just by really sort of blunt instruments like genetic change or mutations?
Yeah, plus the probability of these things caused by themselves is very improbable. And the probability of them being caused by something is a lot more probable. So now let's go back to the fact
call, isn't it?
Yeah, let's go back to the fact of the cause of the first cause and the purpose of it, and now saying why it's God and how all these phenomena point to God, and what your evidences are for God. So now if you were to explain and you were to summarize to an atheist quickly how these things, how we have so if an atheist was to ask you, so what evidence do you have for God, right? So you're saying you have reason to believe there is a God. What are these reasons? You've told me about the mathematical nature of the universe and how things are fine-tuned. Okay, cool, that's one thing.
The need for an uncaused first cause.
Right, okay.
That's the biggest one. The need for an uncaused first cause. And then you build up your argument that it's a being and one that's intelligent and one that's powerful by means of looking at, it has to be powerful anyway to create an amazingly huge and massive universe. It has to be intelligent because there's intelligence built into the universe.
Yeah.
In every way, fractal patterns in nature, this and that. You can go on forever discussing the beauty and the intelligence and the codes in the universe. It's not just a mass of rocks and just with no pattern to it. The reason why we have science, the reason why we have universities and great scientists, is because there's great science to be discovered. Which is another argument, which is what I call the decipherability of the universe, which means that we have been able to decode the universe like a massive puzzle. And this is what Dawkins and Gervais were talking about, and saying, scientists are so wonderful that we out there to learn the truth about the universe. We care about truth, and we out there, in awe of the universe to try and learn about it. But they never ask the question, why is it possible for humans to be able to learn about it? Why is it that we've been able to learn a small amount, then a bit more, then a bit more, then a bit more? First, it wasn't just quantum mechanics from the start. If it was quantum mechanics from the start, and that was the most basic level of science, we would have never understood it. We're able to understand things from a simplistic point of view, then Newtonian physics, and then you get to quantum mechanics and relativity. Does that make sense? So why is the universe decipherable? It's almost as though someone has put it there for us to learn these things. Okay, so, but the final argument is how do you actually really prove God? After all of that, you've got lots of now evidence, and you could flesh out those arguments more, and you can put more and more features into it. But that only gets you that far. That doesn't prove it's Yahweh or the Christian view of God or the Hindu view of God or the Islamic view of God, does it? It doesn't prove any of those things. You then have to bring up the next level arguments to make those arguments. And obviously, for the Muslim, the argument is the Qur'an.
Yeah.
Right, for us, the Qur'an is the proof of God and proof of our religion, which is another massive topic. How do you prove the Qur'an?
Yeah.
Whereas Christians will say the same thing. They'll say it's the Bible, and they'll come up with lots of arguments for why the Bible proves God.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem with Christianity, and obviously, someone will say, well, you're just saying this because you're a Muslim. The problem with Christianity, Christian scientists can be extremely intelligent. They'll have great arguments about science, or they'll have great knowledge about science, but when they get to the Bible, suddenly that logic seems to become a bit more loose. They'll say things like, we've got cast iron evidence for the crucifixion and the resurrection, based on hearsay, based on what people said many, many years ago, based on very poor books and records which are filled with inconsistencies. If you call that evidence, that's quite poor, Yeah. So when people would say, people without knowledge would say that's the same for Islam.
Yeah.
But that's not true at all, because Islam, the proof of Islam, the miracle of Islam, is the Quran. Right? All you have to do is prove that the Quran is a miraculous book.
Yeah.
If you prove that, if you can actually prove that logically and mathematically, then the rest follows clearly from there.
Okay, so you've said, to summarize it for myself, you said there's the uncaused first cause,
Mm-hmm.
and now we've gone into how that uncaused first cause is God,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to find evidence for that uncaused first cause being God. So you want to know that God is all powerful. You can look at the universe and say, well, you have to have a powerful being to create something like that. Then you want to talk about intelligence. You want to look at the universe and say how miraculous and how intricate and precise it is. And then you want to talk about humans and how humans have intelligence and conscience.
Amazing.
And
that's a good point.
how
conscience, morality.
Conscience and morality, because you can explain things through science. A lot of the things are now through science, but conscience
science
is one.
Science can't prove, how logic comes about.
Yeah.
Science can't prove how conscience comes about or morality. It can just make claims. Oh, we did it because it may help us survive. They always say that it helps us because we survive. That's just a little nonsense,
Yeah, but to explain conscience, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have something like that on the universe to look at, and to have, as I see it, as an evidence. It's an evidence to show that there's something greater out there. There's something that there's a lot of things you don't understand, you can't explain through science. And I don't think, regardless of how far science progresses.
Well, that feeling that everyone has inside. Look at Dawkins.
Yeah.
He talks about this great awe of the universe. Even Stephen Fry, who says some horrible things about God, who talks about the universe is full of, suffering and unfairness and injustice. And then he'll say things like, but it's also full of great pleasure and absolutely awe-inspiring things.
Yeah.
So it's there's a part of your internal self that has this ability for finding awe in the universe. You look at a sunset, or you look at a seascape, you look at a beautiful animal or something. It does things to people. Look at all the comments you find on these kind of videos. Look at Attenborough's videos. It does something for people. It's tapping into that innate spirituality inside of a person.
Yeah.
And to say that just came about by evolution, it's just making a claim.
Yeah.
It's begging the question fallacy. It's you can't prove any of that. And as you said before, atheists are very happy to believe things like, oh, it was created by evolution, and it helps you survive better. They're happy to believe things without evidence when it suits them.
Yeah. Yeah. Following. So then to go into, let's say you get to the point of, you do believe there is something greater out there, and you do believe there is a purpose. Then you get to the question of religion, and how would God send that message, and is there evidence around us? And then you just have to look, and I think if you look at the Qur'an, for example, and you study it, and you look at the miracles within it and the science within it, there's undoubtedly...
You see, one second. You see, and as soon as you start talking about this, the atheist mind is going to click off.
Yeah.
Right, because they're critical, or their cynical part of themselves will say, load of nonsense, everyone says the same thing, you're just going to be talking nonsense now, so I'm out, right?
Yeah.
You see, so that's why I think my argument about the proof of the Qur'an is so important.
Right.
Because it's a strongly logical argument based purely on logic and maths, right?
Yeah.
Probability.
Yeah.
So when you make it too spiritual and subjective, it doesn't work. It's got to be a very, very, very cold clinical argument.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, should we just go through that now, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the proof of the Quran? Right. This is a proof that you will find for no other book. Right. The Quran has a long list of what I would call superlative features. Right. Special features. Right. Any book can claim to have some sort of special features, like the King James version of the Bible, which is not actually the Bible, it's just a translation written by people a few hundred years ago. Apparently it's a very beautiful piece of literature, but that's not the Bible, it's just someone's translation that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Say for example you have a really rubbish book, or a book that's not particularly well written, but then someone does an amazing translation, an excellent writer does an amazing translation and uses the most beautiful words and most beautiful prose. Just because that's beautiful doesn't mean the original was beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? But anyway, let's look at the Quran. The Quran has superlative features within itself, right? So let's look at those features, and to have those features, that many features in one book, is quite unusual, right? So the first feature is that it is the greatest work in that language.
Yeah.
And if anyone argues and says, well, I disagree, it's okay, definitely in the top 10. I can't think of anything else that's as great as the Quran in Arabic, but it's definitely in the top 10. So the chance of it, the probability of that already is like 1 in a million, or 1 in, depending how many works of Arabic literature there are.
Yeah.
It's like 1 in a million or whatever. So it's a very low probability. The greatest work in it. If you look at the Bible and the original books of the Greek Bible, they are not known as the greatest works in Greek. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The letters of Paul are not the greatest works of literature ever. In fact, one of the books of the Gospels in the New Testament is said to be like quite poor literature, like written by someone who wasn't a very skilled writer.
Well, wasn't that because the Gospels were word by man, and the Quran is word by God? But obviously,
we're making the point that what are the superlative features of the Quran? So first of all, right. So if you ask somebody, what do you think the Quran is? They'll say, oh, it's just a book written by some, person in the 6th century who was trying to make a name for himself and trying to be a political leader and wanted power and this and that.
Yeah.
So if you're that kind of a person, why would you have such an immense skill in literature? Okay, it could be, maybe those two things went together, that somebody was very, very highly motivated to be a political leader, and he so happened to be the greatest, writer in the Arabic language at the same time. I mean, what's the chance of those two things happening? He was also, he had to fight in wars, physically at the forefront of wars, getting injured in wars. He had many marriages. He had lots of problems. He was exiled from Mecca and had to live out in the desert for 2 years without food. So if someone's living such a tough life, how can you produce the greatest work in Arabic literature over 23 years with all of that going on? That's the first thing.
Bearing in mind he was illiterate.
Yeah, fantastic.
And couldn't read and write.
Well, that's another miracle. You've got someone who's illiterate. There's no evidence that he wasn't illiterate. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, it's the most memorizable book ever.
Yeah.
Right. So you get,
Like look at Mauritania, for example. Mauritania, you go there and you have kids that know the book from back to front.
Really?
And a funny thing is, so to actually get the approval that they know it, what's the word now?
Ijaza.
Ijaza, yeah. So to get ijaza that you do know it, they're their standard is so high that you have to be able to write it from front to back.
Really?
Yes.
Write the whole Quran back to front?
Write the whole Quran back to front before you get ijazah.
That's mad.
I don't know, don't quote me on that because
it sounds like nonsense, that.
But anyway, that's just showing you to the degree that it's memorable.
Okay, I mean, everyone knows that the Quran is the most memorized book or memorizable book, you know, or they should know, unless they're very ignorant, you know, because in Ramadan, every year, every night, one chapter is being read, you know, from memory in every mosque in the world, right? Yeah. Well, not every mosque, but like, you know, 99.9% of mosques.
Yeah.
Right. And then, you know, how many Hafiz do you know? You know, Hafiz means, you know, person who's memorized the Quran. You know lots, right? Obviously, everyone knows to a different level, but, you know.
But the fact is, it's a memorizable book.
Yeah,
I
mean, you've memorized the whole thing, right? You've memorized the whole thing. Maybe it's not so fresh in your memory now, and you need to revise it. But at one stage of your life, you had memorized every single page, and somebody listened to you for every single page throughout the whole Quran, right? I've memorized at least 1/3 of the Quran, you know, and I've known it at some point in my life. I've known known that really well. Now, people will say, well, you only do that because it's a value in your religion and because you're made to do it, and it's in other words, you're motivated to do it. It's not because a book is innately memorable. It's because you're motivated to do it.
Yeah.
That's not true. I'll tell you why. Because have you heard of something called the Bible Bee?
The Bible Bee, no.
Have you heard of something called spelling bee?
Yeah.
What's that?
You have a spelling bee. You have tests of how you can spell and how well your spelling is.
Yeah, it's a big competition in America, where you have young people competing to see who spells best, and they win a big prize at the end.
Yeah.
Right? So it's very, very competitive.
Yeah.
The same thing with the Bible Bee. It's a competition in America where people have to memorize bits of the Bible, and there's a huge amount of money in it. It's like thousands of dollars that you're going to win. So people are very motivated to do it. And there's all YouTube channels like Bible Memory something or the other. There's whole YouTube channels devoted to how to memorize the Bible.
Yeah.
But yet, you don't find anyone that does anything close to what we do with the Quran. They can't recite it without any mistakes. And not only that, they will learn it in the translation of English. They will not learn it in the original Greek.
Right.
All Muslims learn the Quran in the original Arabic, whether they can speak it or not.
Yeah, I think any Christian would agree that the Quran is more memorizable than the Bible.
By far. Right?
Yeah, so that's just a point. So.
Okay, so you've got a book that's the greatest book in a language. You've got a book that's very memorizable.
Yeah.
Let's look at the next one. The next one would be, it's difficult to know what to go for next. Let's just go for mathematical symmetries.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this one, it's a bit more difficult to describe in talking. You've got to see the evidence. Yeah. But if you take all the verse numbers and you add all the sort of chapter numbers, add them up, the number of verses in each one, add them up, you get two numbers, like 6,200 something and 6,500 something. Yeah. And then if you add those two columns together, you get certain numbers, right? And then if you add all the odd numbers together from that total, which is your column 3, it adds up to the same number, 62 something something, I think 6255. And if you add all the even numbers, you end up with a number which is the same as all the verse numbers.
Yeah.
So that's called the Quran checksum miracle.
Yeah.
That's just one example. Then there's these patterns of 19 everywhere in the Quran. There's some amazing patterns on that, Yeah. Never seen anything like that in Christianity.
Yeah.
There is something about sevens in the start of Genesis.
Yeah.
But anyway. So, but there's pattern after pattern. So, for example, second chapter of the Quran, right?
Yeah.
The first proper long chapter, it's 286 verses, right? The middle verse is obviously 143.
Yeah.
What does the 143rd verse say? It says, we have made you a middlemost nation.
Yeah.
Right? So, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, right?
Yeah.
Wasata means, I think, middle. So, the middle verse contains the word middle. How many times does the word day appear in the Quran?
Not sure.
365.
Wow.
So there's things like male and female, come into the Quran the same number of times.
Yeah.
Heaven and hell the same number of times, or angels and
really?
There's lots of of contrasting words that appear the exact same number of times.
Yeah.
But there's huge number of things. You can just go on forever discussing this,
Yeah, you can go to watch a video about that.
Yeah, there's so much about it. So anyway,
I was going to say for me, one of the main things was I don't know how you're ranking it, but preservation. If you want to talk about that.
Perfect.
And how a book can be preserved to the T, word for word, vowel for vowel, and you have tajweed in the Qur'an as well. So it's not like the alphabet with A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
A has 3 different words, A, E, U, or 3 different variations, and the fact
vowel
that
points.
that it's been preserved over 600 plus years.
1400 years.
Don't say 400, from 600 years.
Okay, let's look at this one, right?
Yeah.
Now compare this with the works of Shakespeare,
yeah.
Which is only 400 to 500 years or whatever. That's a very recent time, and no one knows who wrote the books of Shakespeare. There's even a debate: did he really write them, or did he collect them, or were they written by someone else? So even that is not perfectly preserved. Right, the Bible is terrible for preservation. Right, the earliest piece of the Bible that we have is it's called P52, which is from about the year of 125, or maybe even as late as 200. They're thinking now.
Yeah.
Right, and that's just one tiny bit of John. It's like the size of a credit card.
Yeah.
So if that's what you've got as your first bit of evidence, which is about 100 years later, right? You've got none of the early stuff. So most of the Bible evidence, they've got about 5,500 manuscripts.
Yeah.
Right? The majority of them come centuries later.
Yeah.
Only a very tiny percent come from the first or the second. No, none come from the first century. From the second century, you have a very tiny percentage, and then it just the percentage increases as you go in time.
Yeah.
So in other words, there's very little evidence there. So it doesn't compare at all to the Quran, and also the internal inconsistencies and things are just there purely because they were spoken accounts, and someone chose to write them down, and hence you get very different details in the different accounts.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the famous one is, how did Judas die?
Yeah.
On one it says he hung himself. Yeah. Another one says he bought a piece of land and fell headlong into it and his guts burst open. Completely different accounts. Now Christians make all sorts of nonsense up to explain this.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite sad how they do that. But anyway, so preservation. How do we know the Quran is preserved? Right. Someone will say, well, how do you know it's preserved? Uthman burnt all the Quran, so therefore, blah blah this and that. But what they don't understand is how the Quran was transmitted. Right? Do you know the way it was transmitted?
What was transmitted?
Mutawatir transmission. Do you know what that means?
Mass transmission.
No, mutawatir it's like the game of Chinese whispers.
Yeah.
I tell you something, you tell someone else something. Yeah. Let's say I tell you something, you tell 2 people. Those 2 people tell 2 other people each, right? Yeah. So you're getting these massive chains that occur, right? So after about 3 or 4 chains, you'll have about 20 or 30 people in the last chain, right? And each one's got a different chain of people that have told them something.
Yeah.
If you play the game of Chinese whispers or telephone, as they call it in America, then the people in the last chain, the people who've received things fourth hand, will have a completely garbled message.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what if the people in the 4th chain, what if they didn't have any connection to each other? What if they didn't have any connection to each other?
Yeah.
But yet the message stayed exactly the same.
Yeah, continue. Go on. So
okay, let's just think about that again. So if everyone in the final ring, has exactly the same message, even though it's come through different chains, and remember that when the Quran spread, it spread to different countries as well. It spread very quickly in the first few years.
Yeah.
So that transmission would have occurred over geographic area where there's no connection between people, where they could collude together and sort of agree to the same thing.
Yeah.
So they had to memorize it and pass it on to the next, memorize it and pass it on to the next.
Yeah.
And if there were different Qur'ans, there would be hundreds of Qur'ans around the world now with lots of mistakes and lots of variations.
Yeah.
Right? And there isn't. Right? And this thing about Uthman having burned the Qur'ans, it's just those were the different pronunciations of the same Qur'an.
Yeah.
Because the original Qur'an was written without vowels, you know.
Yeah.
It's like texting, you know, when you write TXT instead of TEXT, right?
Yeah.
It was like that. It was written without the vowels.
Yeah.
And people would pronounce it different. For example, you know, Americans say potato, and you know, how do they say it? Tomato and tomato, you know.
Tomato and tomato. Yeah.
So what they did, they standardized the pronunciation, not the actual book.
Right.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Muslims know that it's perfectly preserved, and if anyone wants to sit down with a Muslim and go through the argument in detail, the argument's there. It's a clear-cut, very simple argument, you know, and the information is there. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I mean, you can just go online and research that, do your own research to find out those things at all.
Yeah. Okay, so that's preservation. So you've got great literature,
Yeah.
memorizability, mathematical symmetries,
Yeah.
the fact that it's preserved far beyond anything from the past, you know, perfect preservation, which is amazing. The whole process at which it was done is something that you don't see in anything else. There's nothing in the past that is actually this. It's almost like Muslims invented this thing of passing things along by memorization and preserving a text like that. Give me one example of a text that's been
process.
Give me an example of one text that's been preserved in that way. I can't think of any.
Couldn't tell you.
Okay, so let's look at some other ones then. So another feature would be something I would call a one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
You know, if you are an artist, like say Leonardo da Vinci or Mozart or whatever, you produce lots and lots of little works, and then you produce your masterpiece, don't you?
Yeah.
You don't just suddenly, the first thing you produce is your masterpiece.
Yeah. It's very unlikely.
So if someone is like, you know, not known to be a writer, and then suddenly comes along and just says, okay, here's a masterpiece, at a time when the Arabs were experts at literature, I mean, how likely is it that someone will come along, something else that's unlikely, something else that's unlikely. So it's another feature.
Yeah.
The other feature is a jigsaw, the amazing jigsaw, right?
Yeah.
If you had to bring a book, and then first you have to write page 265, then you have to write page 25, then you have to write page 317, then page 21, then page 57, then page 164, and bits and pieces like that, and it only fits together after 23 years.
Yeah.
What's the likelihood of everything fitting together? You know?
Yeah, no, it's very improbable.
Not only that, okay, you've memorized the whole Quran, right? Don't you find that certain surahs have a completely different feel and rhythm and feel to them?
Yeah, definitely.
You know, like, you know, Ar-Rahman's completely different to Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun. Ma anta bi ni'mati rabbika bi majnoon. You know, it's
and that's coming from someone who doesn't even understand Arabic, and you can still feel the difference.
Just feel the rhythm and the beauty of it, right? So if you've got to write a few of those verses, then you've got to write a few of that verses. You try that with poetry, like write like, you know, 50 or 100 different poems over 23 years, and try and keep the same feeling, and just write a few verses of this one and a few verses of that one over 23 years. Your personality changes over 23 years. You're not going to be the same person after 23 years, and you're still keeping the same feel going about things you started 23 years ago. Ask any artist who's like who's an in-depth artist or creator. Are they the same person they were in every single years over 23 years? Impossible. So that amazing jigsaw fits together after 23 years. And imagine if it died before that, where it wasn't complete. You know, and imagine that it just died at the end once it's all complete. Isn't that also, that's another amazing feature?
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So the amazing jigsaw that all surprisingly all just fits together, right? And not only that, but a lot of verses that were written were about events that occurred at the time. So multiple verses about, and that's got to fit in as well. So this whole thing's got to fit together solidly, in a very melodic and beautiful way. When you've got all this going on, and not only that, but in the middle of all of this, the Prophet is fighting wars.
Okay.
He got himself injured in some of them. He almost died. He's been exiled and starved out from Mecca. He had to go and start a whole new city with all the problems that he had there and all the intrigues with the tribes that were trying to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Right? If you read the whole story of Islam, it's like a very turbulent time. So someone is going to write the greatest literature in Arabic and keep that consistency while all this is going on. I mean, how likely is that?
Yeah.
Any other
That's
features?
amazing. I didn't really think about that.
Okay, and then
I was going to say about
the scientific things, right?
Yeah.
Now the scientific things, you got to be careful because I don't think they're scientific proofs, right?
Mhm.
The way I would see it, it's like
alignment. How it aligns with
I would
science
see it
now.
as name dropping,
Yeah.
like say I'm a doctor, right?
Right.
And someone comes to me and said, what's his like? What are his vitals like? Or what's his hemoglobin? Immediately I know that this person knows something about medicine, right? They're not saying I'm a doctor or whatever.
Yeah.
But as soon as they say what's his hemoglobin and what's his EGFR, then immediately you know that this person knows something about medicine, right? So the Quran drops little statements that gives you the impression that it's written by someone that has great knowledge. For example, you have the unbelievers not seen that the heavens and the earth were a mess altogether, and then we split them asunder.
Yeah.
Sounds like the Big Bang. Or the heavens, we created them with might, and we are expanding it. Sounds like the expanding universe. It talks about mountains having pegs or roots. That's impossible to know when you look at mountains, that they've got something deep down, and that's been proven.
Yeah.
So there's multiple statements like that.
Yeah, like the fetus and whatnot as well.
I'll tell you what's really amazing. This is there's a woman who's not a Muslim who found this amazing. She is into bees, or she loves bees, or she keeps bees. And the Quran talks about the bees making honey, but the word it uses is the feminine word for bee.
Okay.
Because words can have a feminine or a masculine version.
Yeah, Arabic.
And she was amazed because it's only the female bee that makes honey.
Right, okay, wow. And when it mentions in the Quran, it mentions the female bee.
And the whole thing, when he says everything that he talks about, all the verbs and things in those sentences, is in the feminine form.
Oh, wow. And that's like something they could never have known back then, that it was the female bee that created the honey.
It's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, those things really do make the penny drop.
You see,
when
the
you
problem
put all those
now, an atheist is going to make an excuse about that, and make an excuse about that, and it's going to say you copied from this and you copied from that. They're going to make an excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse. What's the probability that all those excuses are valid? And you've got for sure this book is a masterpiece of Arabic literature. It's going for 1400 years and still going strong, right?
Yeah.
It's memorizable. That's an empirical fact.
Yeah.
You can see the fact. It's there. It's evidence. It's clear scientific evidence that it's memorizable. Right? The fact that they'll always say, well, any book can be memorized, so prove it then.
Right.
Why aren't Christians memorizing the whole of the New Testament? Why are there millions of people who memorize the Quran? It's an empirical fact. And there's lots more, the beauty of recitation. Just go online and see people's reactions to the Quran. The beauty of it. It moves people even when they're not Muslim.
Yeah.
So the final answer is that the Quran has a set of features. Each of them is very unlikely, and the combined probability of having all of those in one phenomenon, like the Quran, is infinitesimally impossible. The chance of it is so low that it was just, Does that make sense?
Yeah. The chance for it to be just a random book that was created by a man and written by a man is very, very unlikely. So
and a man apparently who's a warlord and loves women and just wants to kill people and wants to take over the world. I mean, does it really fit with that kind of a person?
Yeah.
To have all these features within it? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's not a book like the Bible at all.
Yeah.
Impossible. The more you learn about it, the more you realize how amazing it is. And the more you learn about the Bible, it hasn't got any known authors, very, very little evidence for early evidence for its origins. There's a lot of corruption as time goes on. There's lots of errors and inconsistencies between the accounts.
Yeah.
You can go on and on, you know.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yes, I think people just need to look into it themselves instead of being scared of looking into it. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say?
It might be sort of like a bit of prejudice because it's a kind of a foreign religion, whereas Christianity is thought of as a Western religion, even though it started in the Middle East. Because it was adopted by the Romans and propagated by it. So for example, you get the rioters in England saying Allah, who is Allah, and these are supposedly Christians, whereas according to their book, Jesus, peace be upon him, was on the cross saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Eloi, El means God, Allah just means their God. Same root word.
Cool.
Great. Any thoughts?
Go read. Go look at the Qur'an. Go question these questions you have. And if you don't believe any facts, you think anything is untrue, go search it yourself and see what you do find. And just be open to doing some research and be open to seeking the truth. And if you're honestly open to seeking the truth, I believe that God will guide you and you'll find something. So
okay, great. Okay, I think that's where we should end it.
Yeah,
great.